we invite you to do this morning. If you would send us a message on the phone line as WhatsApp message on 0809 4440981. Once again, we'd like you to send your thoughts to Freshly Pressed this morning relating to the headlines we're treating this morning with the analyst on 0809 4440981. You can as well also, we're streaming but to youtube.com/smooth981 FM Lagos. Subscribe, hit the like button, and leave your comments there for us. So that said, a big good morning to Oyeyemi Aderibigbe. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Mas. Good morning, Lagos.
You were under the weather a bit, so how are you feeling now?
Very well.
Glad to have you join us this morning
Thank
now.
you.
And also Chibuzor Nwaezeapu is with us this morning. Good morning, Chibuzor.
Good morning, Lagos. Good morning, Oyeyemi. Good morning, Omas. Mashe.
Thank you. Okay. You were the name in then. I can see that. So let's pick up the papers this morning and see. Chibuzor, help us get this started with the Premium Times, where the headline here is a screaming. Nigerian government extends student loan to skill programs enrollee. That's what the Premium Times is saying. But the listener right now will be, this is January. And is this what we should hear now? When is this program, the 5 billion, projected to take off? Students are waiting. Speak to all of this for us.
So I'm not going to be able to answer you specifically on when it would start. I would give you the comment that was given by the president via his spokesperson, Chief. I like to pronounce the chief in front of his name now because he signs off with that. Chief Ajurin Galale. They've said that the implementation of the loan begins later this month. So
today's the 23rd.
Well, there's still some time. We're still in January, so there's still some days left. So we'll take them at their word. So on the surface, the comment makes a lot of sense, and I think strategically Nigeria needs to look beyond the acquisition of certificates to the acquisition of skills to drive the economy forward. But all this obviously we're wrapped in the ribbons of strategy. What strategy do we want? How do we want to develop this country? How do we want to move forward as a country? What kind of mechanism, what kind of process do we want? And that's what we need to be hearing a lot more from the government, that there's specifics. We tend to hear a lot more sound bites, in my opinion, but we need to start hearing specifics of how do we want to do it? What's the data backing up what we want to do? Where do we want to go? And when I speak about data, it now comes to my pet peeve about this particular policy. So on paper, it's great. We've always talked about right funding or right costing of education in Nigeria. Many people have rightly or wrongly used it as a stick to beat up every issue, including why people are leaving the country. Although I think it's just overrated as a factor, as a contributory factor. But when we look at it, we want our educational institutions to be able to charge rightly for the education. And the assumption is that when they do that, they'll be able to give a better quality of education. And I use the word assumption because in some instances, like I know for years, most of the state universities have charged quite higher than the federal universities, and we've not seen that correlation in reality, both from the housing in hostels to the actual educational system. We've never seen that correlation. So we're expecting something to change just because we change the figure. Maybe not. We're expecting universities to take a bit more responsibility for their day-to-day running and have less burden on the government, so the government can channel a lot more funding into other things. So, those are the other things we also do. How do we hold the country and government accountable at some point? How this funding moves? But those are other bad things. One of my major issues with the way the bill has been always structured is how much are you making available for the students who are applying for the loans? And I say this because between, I think it was May last year, when the government, because this was one of the first announcements by the government, because I think it was a pet project by the president's, what's his name now? The former Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Chief of Staff.
His Chief of Staff. It was one of his pet bills. So he pushed it out immediately they came into power. One of the first things I had with the bill was how much were you making available to fund these courses? A lot of the schools, a lot of the institutions, what they did at the end of last year was basically tweak up their fees. And if you look at it, if you look at the basic courses that students are going to be able to take in schools, how much will this fees be able to cover it? How many people are going to be eligible? Because even the entry barrier is so high that it's not going to. A lot of people are going to be cut off from access, and the people that need it. So I think a lot of the assumptions that even went into building this are questionable. But there's also the issue about funding, and that's why everybody's going, when is this going to start? But here in the story, we are hearing that the FIRS boss is saying that the funding, because some of this will be driven by taxes, he's saying that the funding is going to be available. That Zach Aderibigbe has said that the funding sources are made available to ensure the smooth run of takeoff of the program. So we'll wait for the remaining days of the month to see how it runs. They've talked about how they're going to use technology to dispatch it, how the money will go directly to the schools. When it comes to anything government in Nigeria, I'm quite cynical because we've seen various things. I think like last year, myself and Oyeyemi, when we were talking about the housing and mortgage and how it's being dispensed. And we spoke to the challenges of even accessing it over time. I'm hoping that this would be different from most of our other things that have to do with government and accessing. Okay. That people can actually get the funds. But let's not make it in countries where we try and copy because what we're trying to do basically is give alternate sources of funding for students to be able to they have their education at tertiary level. Student loans are not the only means where students can get funding. In most of the countries we are trying to copy, there are scholarships. There are fundings by institutions. And when we talk about scholarships, we're not talking just about education. We're not talking about academic scholarships. We're talking about sports scholarships. There's a lot of it. There's a system around it. So we need to take a step back and look at what do we want to achieve. At times, I think when somebody sees something or hears something somewhere, it starts as a sound bite. We take action without actually systemically looking at it and saying, what, this is what we want to achieve. This is the vision at the end of the day. This is how we want to build towards it. We're in a hurry to act. And at times when we do act in those ways, it creates the opportunities for the guys who just want to take a bit here and there and fund themselves.
Okay, so Oyeyemi, before we move away from this conversation, is there something you would like to add in terms of this student grant coming up and what the government is saying about it?
The report is that they're going to rely on technology to drive the process, the access process, and that's key for data transparency, also for information. If I were involved in this process, this is something that I would immediately put on the website, make it available for everyone to see. Don't feed the fodder of people and cronies having access and others not having access. Make it as transparent as possible. So if technology is deployed, that would be an advantage as well.
Drawing from what both of you mentioned, knowing that earlier on a similar scheme at some point was said will be driven by technology, but somewhere along the line we knew, now we're still trying to settle that. We're waiting for the verdict to come. Again, we've had this technology. How often do we hear this technology will be used, but somewhere along the line it seemed like
Nigeria is maturing.
Okay, maturing by the day. That's where we drift over now to pick up the Vanguard newspaper, Oyeyemi, and here it's again data issues related, but help us understand it better when it says the renewed hope, federal government to increase primary healthcare centers from 8,300 to about 17,600. So will this in itself translate to accessibility and affordability for Nigerians?
So it's a primary healthcare center. So the assumption is the way primary healthcare centers are structured, they're supposed to be accessible and easy. It should be affordable as well because they're for the locality. They're built around our small communities. This is an urgent need. We're under-resourced in terms of healthcare infrastructure, especially primary healthcare infrastructure. And so the Minister of Health, Ali Pate, is the one giving the report or giving the vision, right? And the spread is across different parts of the country, right? But I think it's good. I think it's too early to call it. It's too early to say anything about it. What I would say is we already have dilapidated infrastructure as well. So where there is no need to build new ones, I hope that this 17,000 plus would include resourcing those that have been left and abandoned through other projects. I hope that there will be a lot of efficiency deployed. But this is it's a very key needs in our communities, and it's a great one.
Chibuzor, let's talk about well, Okada. For those if you're just joining in and you're new in the city, that's maybe you're a tourist and you want to understand that this is a mega city, but as it is, and the question of what we're getting here, it's coming in from the Punch newspaper where it speaks of Lagos renews campaign against Okada. Now, is this a case of the Shoinka's Abiku that dies and comes back and goes back, revived? How many times have we banned, reban, unban, ban? And why is this nagging headache of this Okada still with us in a mega city?
I was trying to avoid any commentary on the word or the use of the word mega city, and I think we abuse it a lot in Lagos. Mega cities likely speak to size, and yes, while sizing population, yes, while we'll fall into that. In my personal opinion, as someone who's been born and lived his entire life in Lagos, we are far away from what it means to even benchmark ourselves against some smaller cities in West Africa. But that's besides the point. Let's move away from before people come for my head. Banning Okadas is a favorite pastime of governors in Lagos State. It's like the police and checkpoints. Banning Okadas is something like governors like to do, especially when they start the hype about mega cities or how we want to build mega cities. I'm a bit conflicted when it comes to Okadas and Okada use. As someone who has used them, I do hope, but I wish we lived in an ideal world where in Lagos we would not need them, and that's why I said nature abhors for a vacuum. Now, what had happened in the last ban was that Okadas were pushed basically to particular locations within the state, or supposed to be limited to those states, and basically kept out of the city centers. So most of the places that they were pushed were the outskirts of the state, places that were not far, places that were far from the bright lights. Now, what has happened over time is that you've seen a lot more of them encroaching and coming back into the routes that they used to be in. So as at maybe September, I probably would not see an Okada anywhere around Ikoyi, but towards December, November, I started seeing some of them popping out again. Now, the question I always ask, and I always tend to ask, is that does that speak to the absence of infrastructure, our poor public transport system, or does that speak to things like our poor infrastructure in terms of roads? In some particular areas, I can tell you that it speaks to roads and infrastructure. There are particular locations in Lagos I would not drive to. I would park my car somewhere else and happily look for an Okada to take me there. Because if I dared to, I'll be visiting the mechanic to do a quick checkup on my vehicle afterwards, and I'll be spending money that I should be saving or using for something else. Other places, obviously, things like convenience, speed, all that. You really can't plan your way around Lagos transport system. So a lot of people would impatiently or right or wrongly would jump on the bike and go to their destinations. So, but what I always say about Lagos is that when you talk about your Okada bans and you put in those things, what have you done to bridge the gap that makes it impossible for people to need Okadas? Okadas for me are not even the major menace now. The major menace I would deal with, and most drivers who go in parallel locations are the Keke Maras, and there's a lack of enforcement. So it will knowing Lagos and Lagos governors and how we operate, it will get to a time where they will roll out a ban. Whereas there are systems to enforce, because these Okada drivers, like the Mara drivers, like the Okada drivers yesterday, belong to unions. The government is aware of those unions. When it comes to electoral periods, they are in tandem with the unions and have discussions with them. When it comes to managing their members, they turn the blind eye. So we need to move from the point where we think bans are the solutions to where we actually look at the enforcement. We have last mile guys who are all around. What are we doing to really give them? And the last thing I want to touch on this point is the penalties. So I'm reading through the penalties, and that's why I keep talking about the alignment, strategic alignment between the government, all the governments at all levels. What do we want to do as a country? So one of the penalties about being caught driving or being a passenger on Okada is crushing the Okada and a 3-year stint in a prison. Now, sometime last year, our Minister for Internal Affairs spent a lot of money and goodwill trying to get people out of prisons. But yes, we have the kind of laws that are going to send people for prison into prisons for things that depends on how you see them. They shouldn't be in prison. Why don't you give other things? We don't. But the problem is that we do not want to go through the process of enforcing or monitoring anything. We're looking for the quick wins.
All right, so this takes me to Oyeyemi. I see with a smile. Chibuzor, with his full chest, would own up. Look, at some point he has had cause to patronize, and maybe he still does. So, in your case, Oyeyemi, have you had cause to hop on an Okada because it is convenient, and is it probably answering a social need, an economic need for the man who rides it, because it's not just because he wants to wake up to and do it?
So, as Chibuzor made in his final point, right, it's a systemic issue. They're the economic interests of those who ride it. They're the needs of the people in the communities because the infrastructure does not support other forms of transportation. You know, there's streets that you cannot drive through because they're narrow or they're just mounds, you know, so things like that. But beyond that, I think the core issue is, you know, reworking infrastructure and putting a face to these policies. And when I say a face, who's the man driving the Okada? Who's the citizen in need of the Okada? What is the risk sought to be prevented? You know, what are the issues? And then having a holistic solution. What these kinds of policies do is they just create room for oppression by enforcement authorities. You see it all the time. They crush the bikes, they arrest the guys, they're violating their human rights by beating them up and assaulting them. And it's often, it's even without the ban, they still do it. So when you just enable more oppression. So I think in implementing, there has to be a lot more thought to ensuring that there's no pain point increase for the people.
All right, we have the Punch newspaper waiting for you, Oyeyemi, but that will be after now. But so we'd like to get your thoughts. We see messages piling already on our WhatsApp platform. Let them come across on the phone line 0809 444 0981. We're Smooth 98.1 FM and it's freshly pressed.
It's like listening to the symphony of body parts directed by a maestro. When you walk, it is like watching a G clef stroll across an octave accented by a C sharp. When you talk, the cadence of your voice is a tenor saxophone, making love to a cello at perfect
The
pitch.
banning season, Friday night or Saturday night was styrofoam.
That's why
Just
we keep
woke
it
up
here
from
on
sleep and
98.1.
you know,
This is just
it's a good thing
We're
it's
back.
banning.
It is still freshly pressed on Smooth 98.1 FM. We've still got Oyeyemi Aderibigbe with us here and Chibuzor Nwaezeapu, and we're looking at the papers this morning. So messages will come to shortly after Oyeyemi's papers. Punch newspaper comes with the headline, Lagos centric once again. So let's stay with Lagos. Lagos state government warns against unregistered food products. That's coming from the Consumer Protection Agency of the state. So how can we protect ourselves?
That is, there's a pandemic already. It's really sad. We can't tell what the contributing factors that have led to that increase, because you go to every market, you would see that. You would see unregistered products, you would see products that are expired being sold or even being doctored and adulterated. There are regulators who have a responsibility. At the center of this is the National Agency for Food and Drugs, NAFDAC. You also have even the Consumer Protection Body, the FCCPC, right? And we see them making efforts, but the other day the NAFDAC DG was complaining about being understaffed, unable to pay, unable to push, you know, their objectives because they don't have sufficient resourcing. And if we're talking about food products being unregistered, it means they may not be tested. It means that we have probably a health risk that is brewing, for citizens. It's a very, when you don't have excellent health infrastructure, you don't make such mistakes. So I think we should stop casualizing these things. Unregistered products should not be sold. People who bring them in should face the law, and there should be consequences. It's the fact that there are no consequences that enables people to get more confident to do it, and then you go to the market and it's filled with those kinds of products. There are laws that already stipulate what's to be done. There's a process for registration that is mandatory, right, for locally manufactured goods and imported goods as well. So it's very key that all stakeholders go, even the consumer protection agency that is warning the citizens shouldn't stop at warning. It's not enough to warn the citizens, it's to galvanize energy to go against whoever it is that's selling. We know where these markets are, we know what you do. We have the law that sanctions searches and warrant that, and you just get the law working, and move so that people are safe. The responsibility is not to warn, the responsibility is to protect, and you protect by going beyond warning to actually getting those goods out of the market, and going against those who are breaking the law, and ensuring that they face the consequences of their actions.
So I'd like to add a bit to it, because Oyeyemi said she wasn't sure what was triggering some of the actions. And I'm not saying that this is the sole, because obviously there's always human greed and human behavior. But in instances where you have high rising costs and high inflation, you see a lot more of this. I recall back in the Abacha era, we used to have this interesting thing. That's when products like cowbell snuck into the market.
No.
Then.
Brandon,
Oh, sorry.
one of those milk, one of those milk
one of those
somewhere.
milks. And anyway, we used to have this. There are these popular brands of cocoa chocolate drinks, and we got them replaced by stuff that people used to buy on the bridges in places like Oshodi. We used to call them Eruko Shodi. There used to be a lot. Basically, some of these products snuck into the market, either trying to underprice some of these items and undercutting. And a lot of people tended to look for what was cost effective instead of looking at what was safe. So we have that. No, I'm not saying that's the sole factor.
No, I agree that there's an economic twist to it, but even where you have economic issues, the law must still be followed.
No, I'm
dupes,
not, yeah.
Having dupes in the market or even imitations or copies doesn't mean they should not be registered. They should go through the process of testing, registration.
I am I agree 100%. I'm just trying to say these are some of the triggers, and unfortunately, and that's where while warning isn't enough. You need to educate people about the adverse effects of some of these things, because when we look at some of the fact that some of the pharmaceutical companies, for instance, have exited the country, someone who's asthmatic is not going to spend 65,000 naira buying an inhaler.
Right.
If someone comes into the market and sneaks something, and he goes to his neighborhood guy and who's not being checked by whoever for stocking drugs, and the guy says, "Oh, this thing is quite as effective. It's something called gives him a brand name, and it costs 10 times less, and it gives him a guarantee it works. He'll take it. Only at the end of the day, you don't know what effect it has on the person's health, but because of people are desperate in code, they are not looking out for themselves. So yes, that's where it comes to the entire inspections, protections, but education for me is also very key.
Now, the connection in both the submissions you're making lies that there is this urgent need for a substitute because things are expensive. So there's need to answer a call. But now, in trying to do that, is that a reason why compromise? Now, look for local substitute because you can't get the imports now. In the process, you're compromising the health.
That's why I said education is key. I know of someone, for instance, who our sibling eventually faced a kidney issue because they were using drugs that were substandard. Because the cost of the actual drugs were too high. When I go into a pharmacy and I see the cost of some drugs for my kid, I'm tempted to ask you, can you have something cheaper? But I just say he's a kid. Hey, I don't want to go there down the line. But that's me. I can still afford to make those expenses. So we need to educate a lot, and we need then enforcement, monitoring, all that needs to follow also.
Oyeyemi, drum this in. There's a need to appeal to the conscience of people who are also entrepreneurs too. look.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's very key. Citizens need to be responsible. It's a dual way road. You have government who's supposed to protect citizens as a collective, but citizens also need to be responsible. The economic challenges are global. It's not just Nigeria that's facing them, but we should be considerate of the risks of our actions.
All right, that takes us to our messages. They're waiting. See the piles, they're waiting already. So Ajayi's message from Magodo is what I'm looking at right now. And that message would tell me the students' loan scheme is being proposed by the federal government. Unfortunately, is a ploy to drastically reduce government funding of the tertiary education. And the irony is that majority of the students will not be able to access the loans, thereby denying indigenous students of higher education. Ajayi Olunilua from Magodo. That's Sherry. Then Tunji's message is what we're looking at. It comes up, it says, you can't ban Okada. It's meeting an essential need. Once you ban them, you create a vacuum that only them can fill. No amount of enforcement can fill that vacuum. Tunji as message. Joseph comes up from Silver Estate, Ichibo. It says, well, the so-called student loan was just campaign gimmick. I can assure you that would continue to be a mirage because it was the agenda to win the election. Now reality is staring them in the face. The government is now stammering, confused, saying they will use technology and others. No template, no model. They want to copy, to paste. Now I'll go over to the next one, Ade's message. One of the characteristics of mega city is the population size, and Chibuzor, Oyeyemi will give it. Lagos has it. Okay. Now, megabits, a very large city, typical one with a population of over 10 million, and we are over that. So let's move on. Daniel from Festac goes on, mentions a NLUT chairman, later made a permanent secretary, and he goes on. I'm trying to connect that to the headline, but it's about unions and patronage, and which Chibuzor had also raised earlier on. And so Dan Okudua's message is what we're looking at from Igondo, and it goes, banning Okada in Lagos cannot succeed in Lagos because the government don't have the capacity to enforce it, and the limited transport infrastructure will frustrate it. Dan Okuda's message, a lawyer. And then comes Gilbert Musa's message from Festac. On increasing the number of primary healthcare centers nationwide, this is laudable, but as your analyst Oyeyemi said, before now, we have dilapidated health centers which should be upgraded, like the COVID-19 facilities in Yaba with the date back to 1950s and 60s. More, okay, now we're almost done. Let's go. Ibuku's message from K2 goes on saying, former Governor Fashola solved the Okada problem by licensing companies like, well, we don't have them around now. We place them somewhere along the line and get the card anyway and max it up anyway somewhere. As bike hailing services, which people ordered through mobile apps. Then came the Ambode's administration and did this good work, and here we are. We should go to the licensing model with a mandatory training and education for the riders. This will standardize the infrastructure in the industry, ensure that the train riders are operating the bikes while providing the necessary transport. Ibukun's message. And I'm looking at AB Ambo's message from Badagry. Yesterday it was a single-use plastic. Today, clamp down on Okada. What is the next item on the Lagos government list of banned items? While they are banning and re-banning, they should not forget that unending problems of open defecation and lack of pipe-borne water in their so-called mega city. Bilade Ambo from Badagry. Dimapuza's message. I see you message here. The truth is that I don't see any difference between the Buhari's administration and Tinubu's government. Well, I'm trying to see the connection, but Oluwaseyi's message is a final message here this morning. Did I hear clearly that the funds for the student loan scheme is tied to whatever FIRS is going to be able to collect from Nigerians? Please clear that up for me, because nothing the present government has gotten for themselves were all gotten from sources like loans. So was that are they waiting for taxes on that one?
Part of the funding is from taxes.
Okay. Well, this is where we would wrap it up. It's been a very enlightening conversation. Always a delight having both of you on the show. Once again, thank you to Oyeyemi, Aderibigbe,
Thank you so much, Omas, and thank you, Lagos.
and Chibuzor also. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lagos. It's been my pleasure.
And this is where we say thank you so much for being part of it. My name is Omatseye Atsenuwa. At about 15 minutes past 8 will be time for the Grapevine station. Don't go away.
The headlines, the story,
We
in-depth analysis.
Okada and Lagos. That one it's almost permanent.
I would actually
There's
just,
some good places that you cannot go without a bike.
there are places you just
You
can't
can't enter.
imagine entering. As in, you see the roads and you want to just start, like, you know what, where can I just park? I'm not.
I think the way they are doing it is when there's nothing. Because, for instance, the fire in what's it called in Lagos Island. If you go to certain, even in that Lagos Island, some inner roads.
I was hoping to take that story because